Okay, so everybody have their palettes all set up and their paint all squeezed out. We're going to get ready to do some painting, and this time, this is our last session for this one. We are going to finish it off, and I'm going to leave plenty of time. We're not going to do any exercises today because I want to leave us plenty of time to, we'll finish up our foreground area. So last time we worked on the shadow area and doing some sky holes and arranging or changing up our shapes a little back there and our reflections. And now the only thing we really have left to do is add in some rocks and some shoreline, and then go back and do the process of thinking about what's there, looking at what's there, and deciding what needs to be changed or augmented or what we need to do to the painting, because at this point all of your paintings will be starting to be really individual. They'll all be taking on sort of their own characteristics. So that becomes the point at which you really need to just look at your painting and see how it's going and what it needs, and go from there. So let's see, where shall we start? Get this stuff out of the way. Okay, so we've got our reflections going on here. Make sure I'm in the center. And let's start with our number 4 brush. One of the things that I'm going to need to do is adjust this area. Got really stiff and straight, and I wanted it to be a little more out and in, and have, so that's stuff that we'll work on afterwards. But right now we're going to focus on getting those rocks in. Rocks and land, so, or shoreline. So we've got some dark neutrals, and my shadows in here in the rock area are leaning towards a neutral purple color, and then when I get into my lights, I'm leaning towards a sort of a yellowish light tone, but it's still neutral, it's just leaning, right? And the thing about rocks is we'll start with dark, and we'll add some medium tones on top of it and some light tones, and we'll come back then and add some reflected light. And reflected light is really fun. It's, you know, if you're looking at a sunlit area, it's just going to be lit by the sun, and it's going to be influenced by the color of the sunlight and the color of the object that's being lit. But when you get into the shadow areas, you're also going to see some of the light that has come down and then bounced off surrounding surfaces and bounced back up into the shadow areas. You can see that right here on this little rock. You can see I've got some of this red-orange bouncing up into the shadow. And so you'll often get that, and reflective light can really add vibrance and lively interest into your shadow areas. And it's also it can get very complicated because light just bounces. It can bounce off of the ground. It can bounce off of surrounding objects. It just bounces all over the place. So it's a way to use color so that your rocks don't end up looking really monochromatic. What you want to avoid in rocks is taking, like, say, just a straight neutral like a black, and then adding white to it. Yes, you've got dark, medium, and light, but you haven't shifted your colors, and so it won't kind of blend into the environment as well. So let's take, first of all, our palette knife, and let's mix up some neutral. And of course, with our neutral, that's going to be our 3 primary colors. So we're going to take some blue, and I'm using my palette knife so I can mix up a big amount of it more easily. So we've got blue, red, and let's use Indian yellow because it's darker. So you can use, you know, depending on, just give it a try as far as quantities of each. I think I used pretty much equal amounts of each one in this mixture. And then you can always come back and adjust it. But I like to leave my dark neutrals leaning a particular color. I don't like them to be really, really neutral. I like them to have some color to them. This one is leaning towards a red purple right now, red violet. And you can tell that by putting a little bit of white in it, some of it, and then you can see what color it's actually going towards. And mine is a real red violet color, just kind of interesting. I think I want it to be a little bluer than that. So I'm going to go ahead and add some more blue. Yeah. And it's easier to use your palette knife when you're mixing big amounts. You don't lose as much paint because it tends to get up into the bristles of the brush, and it's also easier to wipe it off and move to the next color without getting your paint really contaminated. Let's put some white in that and see where we are now. I'm okay with that. That's just kind of a neutral purpley color. But what I'm going to do then is I'm going to have some of it, which will represent the darkest part, that I'm going to add more blue to. So what am I doing? I'm creating a dark, a medium, and light. They're not only different values, but they're different colors. So I'm going to put more blue in some of it to make the darkest dark. Because in general, we go towards the idea of cool darks and warm lights. All right, there's some dark with more blue. And then I'm going to make a medium tone by just adding white to this. And the thing with rocks that I really like is, you know, rocks, the values or the colors are all neutralized, but you see all kinds of different colors. Bluish neutrals, reddish neutrals, yellowish neutrals, orangish neutrals. So you can really have fun creating those different colors. And they also, you know, one of the things to kind of avoid or think about when you're making rocks is in any particular rocky area, all of the rocks aren't going to be the same color. So some of the rocks maybe will be more yellowish or brownish, and some will be more blue-grayish. So that's something to think about when you're creating areas of rocks like we are. Sometimes you get a natural situation where it's just all the same rock, but not always. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to this lighter version. That's going to make that even more neutral and warm it up some. So I've got a bluish dark, I've got a purplish mid-tone, and then a lighter yellowish kind of color for my light. And that's just the basic colors, and we'll do a bunch of other mixtures by just mixing the different colors together. And then of course they'll also mix on the canvas as you're painting. But that gives us at least something to play with and start with. All right, so as far as where we put these rocks, we can really put them, you can put them wherever you like. So I've got some out here in the water, like here's two out here, a bigger one, and then there's a smaller one. Then I've got one big one. This is the one I really like compositionally, to have this one that's kind of going off of the canvas and is kind of stopping the eye here and creating a small area of dark there. That's the only one compositionally that I think we need in the painting, and the rest are just to create interest on the water and show this as water. So you can put some here, you can put some back here, you can put some in the background, you can put them wherever you want. You can have more or less rock depending on your preference. And then this is just a little bit of the shoreline coming out. So it's flat, it's going to be lighter. I'm using my number 4 brush, my medium-sized brush. And let's first start by, I'm going to take some of the light and put in this shoreline area. Kind of lost it over time. So it just kind of comes out here like this, comes back in here. Start with that on the, getting that shore area decided. I kind of I came up a little far. I think I want a little more room for my rocks. So one thing that I can do is, while that's, since the underneath is really dry, I can take a wet paper towel, a damp paper towel, because that paint is still wet, and I can just scrub that off. Because I just got up a little far in there and I want room for my rocks, so that's one way to do it. Okay, so that's, I've just put some light in there like that. Then I'm going to come right in with my darkest color, and I'm going to put in the whole shape of the rocks. Now when I do rocks, I try to make sure you have enough paint loaded on your brush as always, but I like to work in straight angular brush strokes as opposed to being really rounded. They will have a tendency to go more rounded anyway, but making little short angular brush strokes seems to give more of a rocky appearance, if that makes sense. So these ones out in the water are going to go up, just making little short. Now, we're also going to remember that the ones out in the water are going to have a reflection. And because this is closer to us, we're seeing this reflection even more clearly than we did with our vertical brush strokes in the back. So we're going to create those shapes below as above. So we'll make these little mirror images as we go with these rocks. I'm going to start with the dark, and kind of connect the shapes together. Still using that big brush because I don't want to get myself caught up in making little tiny fussy brush strokes. I want to try to stay as loose as I can, and using a bigger brush can help with that. Got a few little rocks over here. I think I maybe put a couple off the end of that for fun. Maybe one right there. Just wherever I'm going to put a rock, I'm going to use a little bit of this dark. And we know we're going to have to adjust this later because, for example, this dark is too dark to use in the distance here. But I'm just deciding where I'm going to put those little rock shapes. You can have as many or as few as you want. You can have some that come up that are on the they don't need to just be right on the edge of your shoreline. They can be on the ground there. Of course, when I put this dark onto where I've put the light, it automatically mixes and gives me a mid-tone in there. But that's okay because I can come back later and darken that up after it dries a little bit. All right, so before it gets too dry, I want to go into my mid-tone. So I'm thinking about the light kind of coming from this direction and striking this side of the rocks more so, sort of the top and the right side of the rocks. So, and then what comes in between that then is the mid-tone. So maybe I'm going to just leave some area on the left side and start making little shapes. Oops, that's the reflection, so that has to be like that. On top of our dark. So you're going to think about the top and the right side, and this reflection has the mirror image of that. And over here in the shadow area, we won't ever go up into the light, so all of our rocks that are in this shadow area are going to have the medium as their lightest tone. I can use some of this medium here on my shore. Because you probably have mixed up a little different color than you used before, which I did. So I'm going to make sure I integrate this rock color by using it on the shoreline. And I also know that I want to, well, not there so much. If you're wanting to reshape this area, wherever we work on the background, and if it's an area that you're wanting to reshape, you can use those background colors to do your reshaping. And coming in with some light then. And what will happen is this light color will blend a little bit depending on how dry your paint is. My darkest dark is pretty dry actually. So you can take advantage of that by putting little interesting shapes on your rocks. If you put a little bit of the light in one area or another, it's going to show that that part of the rock is, maybe sticking out towards us or got a different shape to it. Put this light on the shoreline, remembering our ins and outs when we're working on the shoreline to not just have it be a straight line, but have it kind of go in and out. So that's just kind of the basics, and then you just go back and forth using your different colors until, so what will happen is we'll come back where you're doing these reflections on the rocks. We'll come back and put a little water, a water trickle, a water something horizontally across the middle there, and that will define where the bottom of the rock is. So I like to just come back in and change up the shapes of these rocks a little bit here by using all these different colors. And have little cracks in them, or some shadowed areas and some not shadowed areas. Using some of this shadow color to put some shadows underneath these bushes and stuff back there. Create a little bit of shadow on the ground. It's really just random little marks and shapes of these different colors that's going to create some feeling that there's some kind of detail going on there. And then you can always shift the color a little bit, add a little bit of other colors. Experiment and see what looks interesting. If an area of yours looks boring, then add some new shapes. And if it looks too busy, like mine was starting to look too busy, so I just come in with some white or some of my light and even it out a little bit. Remember, along the shoreline, it's usually going to be darker where the dirt or the sand or whatever this is wet. So add a little bit of that wetness blended in. So I can add my very darkest dark in the back, and then I can bring in a little bit of light on my brush and blend that into the darker colors to lighten them up just a little bit. So we don't want them super dark back there. I like this, these tones though. I'm adding a little more of these tones up into the bushes, the kind of the dead grasses there, to bring that color up in there. Put some of this blue up in the shadow area. Don't forget your light area, the edge of this peninsula where the sunlight is hitting the end of it there. Rocks are fun. You could just really play all day long with rocks. Of course, it's always good to have a photo reference. So if you ever get frustrated with what you're doing and feeling like it's just not working, go back and do a little Google search and find an image of rocks and take advantage of that. Okay, let's move on. So I'm feeling like as it's dried back, the lighter values here have gotten a little darker and cooler. So at some point I'm going to come in with some even lighter tones. But first let's put a little bit of that reflected light maybe. Let's do the water first, and then we'll be able to see what's still standing and what we need to adjust or fix. So I'm going to What we're going to do is we're going to make a color that's similar to the sky. So if my sky was really a blue, I would use a blue, but our sky in this case is kind of gray. So I'm going to start with blue. I'm going to add some of that neutral that we already made up to neutralize it. And that's going to give us, actually I could have just used my blue dark, but now I'm going to take white, and then I'm going to see where that color is. And it's still a bit blue, so I'm going to add a touch of red and a touch of yellow, which would make orange, which is the complement, and that is going to help me neutralize that a little bit. Get back to a color that's similar to my sky, a little bit darker though. So I'm gonna ask, I think it's Patty. I think if you don't mind muting, I think we're getting some background noise going through there. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so let's see what this is. I'm gonna check this color over here on against my sky and see how dark, whether I'm in the right color range. And I seem to be darker, which I want to be as far as working down in the water. You want to be a little darker than the sky. So I'll start with that and see if I like it. So what water does is as it ripples and the surface of the water becomes agitated a little bit, it creates different planes that reflect different things. So it creates little parts that come up and reflect the sky or reflect what's around it. So that's how you get those sky reflections. And then when you get to an area that gets really agitated because it's running into a rock or a shoreline or something, you get those little wavelets, and those are even lighter in value. So we'll start with these sort of medium light colors, and I've got my round brush that I'm using so that I can get a nice little tiny point. And I'm going to take that brush into get loaded up with paint, and then I'm going to roll it on the palette till I get a little tiny fine edge there. Camera doesn't want to focus on it. Yeah, anyway, you get the idea. A little tiny point, and I'm going to hold the brush. I'm going to have plenty of paint in the brush, but I'm going to hold it very loosely. And I'm going to think about creating horizontal lines that reflect the water agitation. And so I'm going to move my hand in a water-like way, if that makes any sense. So I'm going to move it horizontally, and I'm kind of have it swing this way and that way. So I'm going to go along the shoreline. I'm not going to do a completely, one line, but instead I'm going to create stops and starts. I'm going to come out into the water and create these little ripply effects. So you're just creating little ripples of water. And this pushing and pulling horizontally with the brush and go around the areas where rocks are, because the water would be disturbed by hitting the rocks and hitting the edge of I can bring some of it up a little bit, kind of reshape the edge of that. When I get down to the rocks themselves, remember how we did the reflection below, so I'm going to come right through the middle, the bottom of the rock, excuse me, to define where that reflection is, where the water is, where the water line is. So they come across the reflections. I'm holding it real loosely. Now I'm not going to go into my shadow area with this lighter color. I'm going to make that color a little darker when I go into the shadow area. So you can have as many or as few of these as you like. It's always nice to put them right around the rocks and the shoreline just to define that. But as far as other areas in your painting, it's totally up to you as how calm your water is. So the other thing you can do is if you place down a ripple, and then you can rinse your brush, dry it off, and do some blending. Come back on one side of the ripple and blend it out. That makes it seem a little bit like a little wavelet forming. So you can blend some of it out. You can take the edges of the ripples and pull them out so that they are a little softer. And of course that kind of blending has to be done right away. You can't let it dry before you do that. So we're just getting some little ripples that define where the water is. And you come along the base of those rocks over the top of the reflected areas. I have some out here at the end of the water too. So all I'm going to do in this shadow area, we need the same things over there, but they need to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to go ahead, I've got this darker bluish color here. I'm going to add some of that back in because this is the shadow area, so everything is going to be darker. Kind of look at the comparison between the sparkly bits and how much darker, how much lighter they are than the other areas, and that you want that same contrast when you go into the shadow. So by being darker, they're actually going to look like the same kind of thing because they're in shadow. That made no sense whatsoever, but I think you know what I mean. See, if I put this color right next to that color, it's quite a bit darker. But when I put it over here in the shadow, it doesn't look like it's darker. It just looks like the same thing. Be sure to get enough paint on your brush when you put your brush strokes down. There's nothing more frustrating than finally getting the brush stroke that you want and you didn't have enough paint on your brush. So it's blending out some of those areas in between, here and there. You can use your wet paper towel technique and take some of it off if it gets too thick. Anyway. So remember to go darker when you get over in this shadow area or you'll blow your shadow. It won't look like shadow anymore. So some of the things that help with this technique, holding your brush very loosely, holding it really horizontally, and not so much using the tip as kind of tilting it so you're more horizontal. You can spin your brush as you pull, and you're like pushing and pulling and pushing and pulling to get those wave-like effects. You want it to feel loose and unrestricted like water is. Feel the water, be the water. Can be really effective to put down a line and then rinse your brush, dry it off, and blend out one side of the line. That's kind of what I did right in here. And you can kind of see how that makes it look like a little wavelet forming. Okay, let's add some other colors to our, let's go back to our number 4 rock brush, and let's mix up some orange, because we'll probably need it in the next steps anyway when we go back to working on making any adjustments we need to make in the rest of the painting. So I'm taking yellow and red to make up an orange that we can use and mix all kinds of different directions. I'm just going to take and get most of that off of the brush so there's not much left. And then I'm going to grab some of my medium tone of neutral and then just mix that. So it just has the remnants of what was on the brush, and that's going to mix in with that color and make a different color. Add some white to that, lighten it up a little bit again. So I've got a real brownish color, which I like. That's a nice warm neutral color. And I'm just going to look at my rocks now, and I'm going to pick out some, like I think maybe this one I want it to have some warmer tones to it. So I'm just going to add some warmer tones, not to all the rocks, but to some of the rocks. So that's that concept of, not all the rocks are going to be the same color. And you're going to have more interest if they have some different colors. So that's nice. I think I'll do a little darker version of that. So I'm going to put some red in it. So here's where you just can go crazy and just take those neutrals and mix them a little bit different ways and find some different fun colors to use. Like these little touches of warmth over here in the shadow. Of course, all of these neutrals you can use up here in the bushes. You can use them wherever you feel like you need some color interest. It's important when you introduce a color into the painting to not just use it in one spot, but to move around the painting with it and use it in other areas. I can bring in some of that, little bit of that brighter orange like I did on the other one. And in this rock where the shadow side is, I can put a little bit of brighter orange, and that's that reflected light. Just a tiny touch. Try that. I can take some of this neutral, medium neutral, and I can add a bunch more blue to it. So just play around with your colors there, taking those neutrals and adding orange, add red, add blue, add different colors to those, and come up with some different shades to use on your rocks. And then when you find them, don't use the same shade on all the rocks, but have some one color and some another color. And you can add white and have lighter and darker versions of those. So wherever on your rock where you've put a light color, you want to stick to your light colors, right? But if you've, and in the shadow, so stick to the same value. Don't mess up your values that you've already established. Which side is the light side, which side's the dark side, but just adding a little more different colors. Something that's a little more alizarin-y, maybe in dark purple for the shadow. Remember those reflections, whenever you add something different above, just tap that into the reflection. Those are just little touches, you know, it just brings a little more excitement to the painting. Doesn't have to be a lot. And then when we get, this is the point at which we look at that light value after it's nice and dry and decide if it needs to be adjusted at all. I feel like I need more yellow in my light value. So I'm going to take my light neutral and add yellow to it and add white to it. So that gives me a little bit of a yellower version. And I can try that out. I'm not going to cover up everything, all the other colors and values, but I can add this. It can be another layer of complexity. You often have to redefine those lights as the paint dries, because they go away, they blend back in, they darken as they dry. So I can add some of those lighter lights back in. Remember, if it looks too light, it's just about right. Just kind of horizontal brushwork. I'm doing a little bit of what we called scumbling, where you just very lightly touch the canvas so that some of the other color underneath shows through. It's not a really solid brush stroke. This is where you can actually not have as much paint on the brush because you're letting some of it show through. Try to get some distance on your painting, so hold it up away from yourself. Look at it on the screen. Just find ways to see it as a distance, so you don't focus on the details as much, but you start seeing the overall effect. And wherever you see something that kind of stands out, maybe in an area that you don't want it to stand out, that's when you can make an adjustment. Maybe you've got a shape that's too regular that you need to make it a little less regular. Maybe you need some blending a little bit between your lights and your darks. Need that, bring that mid-tone in, get some blending going on. Fun stuff. The last thing I want to do is just come in with some little tiny little bit of even lighter sparkles on that water. So I'm going to use mostly straight white. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of yellow to it. Just a little bit. And I'm not going to use very much of this at all, but just in a few spots where maybe the water would really be getting some attention, and also where I want to draw attention, I'm going to use a little bit of some lighter sparkles. Just a little bit. So here, near the area where the tree is, I want to draw a little more attention here. So I'm going to use a few of these sparkles in the area of the tree, and then just a few here or there. Just the same way as the other ones, but these are just going to be a little bit lighter. If I put them all in this, mostly in this area leading to the tree, I think that'll give me a nice effect and help with the having it be a focal point. Just a few, and from a distance especially, that'll give you just a little more sparkle. I'll just mostly put them in this area leading up to the tree. So that is, it's the point at which we've done everything we want to do. We've done all the elements that we want to do. So now it's just a process of taking a look at the painting and deciding what things aren't quite working that we might need to touch up. And this is also the point where I generally leave the painting aside. I put it somewhere where I can see it during the day and just glance at it and not really think about it, but just let my subconscious work on it and seeing the things that bother me. And a lot of times I'll put a little piece of paper and a pencil next to it, and I'll jot little things down that I see that I want to just try to touch up. And sometimes it's just the smallest thing that you can touch up, and it makes a big difference in the overall of the painting. So that's the kind of stuff that we're looking for now. I know that one of the things I want to do, and it's also the point at which you kind of put the reference completely aside and you're only looking at your own painting and how that painting has developed and what it's needing. So I know that this area here I felt like got too solid, and I wanted to reshape this this edge line a little bit, bring some of that orange in, make this more of a tree-like shape. I'm not sure, just something about this got too solid. I already brought some of the shoreline in here, which helped. I also wanted some lighter green along the edge of the bush here, as if the sunlight's kind of come around the edge. I put some darker sky color up here that's obviously too dark, so I need to blend that in there. And I've got some bright red spots here that I'm not sure I like. I might blend those out a little bit. And then I just don't, I put some yellow in here, and it's very spotty, polka dotty looking, so, as is some of the brush strokes in here. So I think I just want to do a little more mid-tone colors in the bush, in the tree, in the focal point tree. I want to keep those nice darker darks and lighter lights. So I want to keep that contrast going on, but it just got a little bit coarse looking in here, and some of the other areas are looking more finely defined. So I'm just going to work a little bit on that. Probably bring a little bit of some worms back in here. Just going to kind of look overall and do little touches here and there. Anything that draws my eye, and not in a good way. These dark shapes here are really drawing my eye and looking really messy. So I know I want to adjust those. So I just go kind of step by step, and anything that draws my eye, I'll adjust that a little bit. So there's probably, 3 times as much observing time as there is actually putting any more paint on the canvas. It's more just observing it, reacting to it, and then making small adjustments. So that's what we'll do at this point. What I do want to show you before after you've finished all of the things that you've decided that you want to change and you've decided you're done with your painting, the last thing that I do to finish my paintings is I add a finishing varnish to the painting. It's hard to see, but you can kind of see when I turn this sideways to the camera. You see how some areas are very shiny. Alizarin Crimson is a very glossy paint, and other areas are very matte. They're not glossy at all. So you get all these big variations in gloss across the surface of the painting. And I don't particularly like that. And some of the areas that are not glossy get kind of dull in their look. So after I'm done and it's dried, I usually leave it dry for a day. I use this product on mine. This is Liquitex, and it's called Gloss Medium and Varnish. So you can use it for a medium too, but I just use it for a finish varnish on mine. And this is a brushed on, so I just use a brush, bigger brush about this size, but you got to use an old brush because this stuff messes up your brush. It hardens up no matter how much you clean it out. So, but it's not it's not oil based or anything. It's a latex based, just like our our paint is, an acrylic base. So all I do is I go in and I brush it. I hold my painting up sideways to the light. So if you hold your painting up sideways to a light source, you can see the glare on it. So if I hold it up to my eye level and sideways to a light source, I dip my paint in the varnish, and then I just brush across my painting. And the reason I'm holding it up like that is I don't want to keep brushing over the same place I've already put varnish down, as that dulls out the finish again. So I just lay down a brush stroke, and I use short brush strokes that kind of follow the way that the painting is. It adds a little more texture to your painting. You can see a little bit of the bumpiness when you do it this way, which I like. And so I just go over the entire painting with this varnish, which is what this one has on it. So you can see, do you see how now it has a uniform gloss to it? Now, if you don't like a glossy finish, you can also, it also comes in matte, in a matte finish. I kind of like the glossy finish. To me, it's like when you have a rock and it gets wet, you get it wet and all the colors kind of come alive again and become brilliant again. So, so I just put that varnish over the entire surface. It protects the paint. It evens out the finish. You can wipe this off with a wet cloth if it gets dirty. You're not going to hurt it. Not that you would anyway, because the acrylic paint does the same thing. So that's what I do as a finishing touch on the painting. And then when I'm done with that, and that's dried for a day, I put masking tape around the edges, and then I come back and I paint the edges black. And I just do that because for me that makes a nice uniform finish. You can also paint around the edges of your painting so that your painting goes all the way over the edge. Or you can, if you can just leave them, you know, natural like this, if they're going to be framed in a frame that fits on top. So when I place the masking tape, I go over the edge of the roll. So you notice if you're working with stretched canvas, the canvas goes to the edge and then it rolls off a little bit. So I don't want to bring the black to the top of the roll because then it would be visible from the front of the painting. So I bring my masking tape down over the roll, and then I paint the side. And I just use a latex paint, a latex house paint, a good quality satin finish latex house paint that I put along the edges. And then I always frame mine in a floater frame just for just because it gives me a uniform sort of presentation to all my paintings, and also because these are fairly cheap. You can get these frames, I get them through Jerry's Artorama, and you buy them in bulk and they get on sale. They'll get as cheap as like 11, 12 bucks a frame, which is great. And floater frames are just, they're open, so it's just a frame around the edges, and you lay the painting on top of the frame from this side, and then you screw it into the frame of the canvas with these little things that come with the frame. This hardware comes right with the frame, which is nice. And you screw those in. So the back is open, the canvas gets lots of air. You can go ahead and do the paper on the back. I never do. I like the back visible, and it gives it lots of air so it doesn't get moisture caught in there. And so what these floater frames do then is the side of the canvas is exposed a little bit, and you see the entire edge of the canvas. Nothing is obscured by a frame sitting on top. So that's why I paint them black, the sides black, because it just kind of blends in with the frame and makes a nice, simple look that doesn't interfere with the painting, but gives it a nice finish. So that's how I finish it. I sign the front of my paintings, of course, and I write the name of the painting on the back. I just use a Sharpie and I write that on the back. I don't date my paintings. I mean, there's a lot of different controversy about that. I feel like it doesn't matter if I painted it 10 years ago or yesterday. I don't like them to feel dated. So I don't know. That's a personal thing. I'm not expecting to be in any museums any day, so I'm not really worried about that. I put my name on it and I put a business card on the back, and that works for me. So I don't always get to talking about the finishing touches, so I wanted to make sure that I got to that before we got to the end of the painting. So I'm going to go back with my oranges and try to resolve my tree a little bit more. I really like the way this tree in the original has like a softer look. There's more blended. It's still got the lights and the darks, but it's not as kind of choppy as this one is, especially down here. I don't like that choppiness. So I'm going to see if I can't get a few more blended colors into this tree without making it too blended. I want it to be that focal point, so I want to give it as much interest as I can. So I'm just going to come in with these oranges, different amounts of yellow in them, and see if I can't. So what I'm doing is I'm leaving one edge of those yellows that are kind of choppy looking. So I'm leaving the top edges crisp, and I'm blending out the bottom edges with some slightly lighter colors. And I think that helps right away just by blending out those bottom edges. So I left the top ones crisp and then just added orange underneath, which was a mid-tone between the dark and the light. So let me add some alizarin crimson to some of my orange to get a mid-tone between that orange and that red. So I can bring that up in and soften out some of those really crisp edges that are just drawing my eye and not in a good way. So I know I do want to have some nice dark down at the bottom. So I'm going to take some of that alizarin and add ultramarine blue to it. And that's going to give me an even darker dark just for this very bottom edge. I'm using my big brush, my number 4 brush. It's not big, it's just bigger. I'm not going to my small brush because I don't want to get too fussy. So if I put some of this dark right next to the very light yellow, that will make that light yellow stand out even more. And then I'm going to go back to my orange midtones and blend between those. I'm blending out those edges. So I get the color shift, but I don't have that really stark, hard edge. Something like that. Some of my lighter colors up at the top. There's a lot of back and forth, ins and outs of that. I get into an area that's got a lot of paint in it, and I know I can take some straight yellow, blend that in, and it'll give me a little subtle shift, but it's going to blend in with the color underneath it because it's wet. Thinking of making big shapes not just, and connecting shapes, not just having polka dots. And wherever it comes forward, whenever the shape, you want to give the shape, so if it's looking too flat, that means you need some lighter shapes in the middle of it. Bring them forward a little bit. Bring them towards the viewer. I'm going to add just a touch of white to that yellow because that yellow is so transparent. So if I add a little touch of white, just a little, not enough that it dulls out the color, but just enough to give it some opacity. I'm going to blend that lower edge. Just thinking about the little branches and how they might be shaped and formed. That's looking a little better to me. I'm getting rid of some of that really chunky dark stuff. That's not too bad. I think I'll leave that. And hopefully not getting too far off the colors so that I don't have to do any adjustments to my reflection because I don't want to do that. So we got the rocks on top of there and everything. But what I do want then is to use some of these colors, I think sort of this darker orange, and reshape into, actually let's put a little bit of yellow into that. I want to reshape into this tree a little bit. Have a more interesting edge to it. That's looking too bright. Dull it down a little bit, put some red in it, some yellow. I don't want a bright orange in there. I just want to try to come into this tree a little bit. I think maybe I don't want it at all down in here. Try to have the tree come more out like that. Some red in, just to create, so it's not all one color back there. All right, I want some green. And lighten it up a little bit to give a little bit of a lighter edge to this bush, where it's getting a little bit of backlighting from that sunlight coming around the corner. Add more yellow so it has more than one color on there. It's kind of fun. I need to put a little bit of that in this reflection though. Try to work around my rocks. Rinse and blend. Still getting an area here that's hard to define what's forward and what's back. Yeah, I think I'm going to go a little darker right along the edge of my green tree. I'll put a darker green. Because that orange is still wet, so gotta be careful not to blend. I don't need it up there so much. I just need it down here where it's right against the bright tree. I'm not being able to understand the foreground and the background very well. It's a little better. Then I have to have a little bit more variety. Bring some lighter green. As long as the very edge shows up as dark against the lighter background, I think we're okay. These more yellow greens too are helpful. There, now I can see my background and foreground a little better. Just have to. Okay. Using that value in some other spots too, because that's pretty dark, so I got to make sure I use it in other places so it's not alone. All right, and then my red tree also needs some softening up and something a little more interesting. I like to use, been using a lot of Indian yellow in that foreground shadowed tree versus the Hansa yellow in the background. So I'm not doing a lot here. I just want to blend some of these shapes. Again, I got a lot of really separated sort of polka dotty shapes that I just want to blend together a little bit more. And I'm also blending out some of this bright red, which I didn't really want. Took too much attention. This green tree needs a little something. I think I'll add a little bit of some bluer green over there. Have it a little bit different colors maybe than that one, but the shape is gone, like disappeared. Doesn't have any top edge anymore. So I can go a little lighter over here because I'm on the interior part of this shadow. So I needed to stay dark along the edge, but in here I can go a little bit lighter, and that little bit lighter will give that depth coming forward. I have a real tendency to, because I'm holding my brush like this, I get all my plants going one direction like this. So you have to be really aware to rotate your arm around so that some of your plants are growing up that way, not just all the same direction. And it's not drawing my eye anymore, so I'm pretty happy with that. Some dark, maybe a little hint of some branches or sticks in some of this. I don't know if we used our, I don't know if we used our liner brush in this, so I'll go ahead and, whoops, I'll go ahead and drop my liner brush on the floor. But that's a good way to create just some little varied organic things going on in an area like that too, is to use their long thin liner brush. And whenever we use a liner brush, you take some of the paint and you add water to it. So I'm just using this dark purple that we used over here on the rocks. So you add water until it gets more of an inky consistency, and you brush back and forth, flip it over, brush the other side, flip it back, brush the other side. So by flipping it back and forth, you get this one flat side. And then you can do some little twiggy things. We did this in the brushstroke practice, so I can flick up some little twigs, maybe in one of the trees here. Put some over here. You can do them in dark and you can do them in light. And what I will usually do is put some in and then come back and cover up some of them. Let's do some in an orangish color too. Adding some water, getting lots of paint on the brush. You can do little flicks for grasses. You can do little spots like dried seed heads from weeds, or little tiny leaves. Some edges. It just adds a little more feeling of detail, some little bit of a finer shape in there. Just put some in the shadow like that. You can, I'll add some white. The liner brush does not work very well for paint, for mixing paint, but we're not going to do very much. So, but there I have those little, like they're seed heads there, and they're in the shadow, and then they go into the dark. So I'll put some lighter ones up here where it's in the light. And that's kind of fun. It's like it's transitioning from shadow to light. Yeah, just a way to add some fun detail. Can also use those little squigglies that we did, just random squiggly marks to add a little bit of chaos in the world. Use some back here too for see, mix sort of a putty color with the purples and the oranges. And this feels like in the back needs, especially here where we got our focal point, I can add some small shapes will bring more attention to that area too. Oh, that's kind of fun. You could even, I don't know, I'm almost feeling like this one needs a little bit of green up here. That's it. You know, some of these bushes might have been coming into the foreground a little bit. I think I'll put a little bit of green coming up onto this rock here. Maybe some there. Bring some different color over into that rocky area. It's looking awfully similar. But we have so much color with the shadows that, or the reflections, that it's not that big of a deal. But I'm just using my big brush and just flicking up, starting with the dark and then flicking up a little bit. Put a little green in there. It's kind of fun. Gotta go over the edge of the rock though. Can't stop right at the edge of the rock. Something like that. That's kind of fun. Oh, I have to fix my sky. I got too dark up there. Blue with a little bit of orange for neutralizing. And a lot of white. That's about right because it's slightly lighter than the sky, which is what you need. If it's too light, it's just about right. One side. Reshape this a little bit. Make it like two separate trees instead of one big. I don't hate that, except that it brought a lot of attention up here because it's very dark and very light. So I'm just going to bring some reds into those red trees that aren't quite so bright. Or dark. Dark is what I mean. Because the tree is very dark right there. And neutralize that red with some of our mixed up neutrals over here. See where we are in value. Okay, that's a little bit lighter, which is what I'm going for. too red. More purple. Okay, I'm just about done here, and then we can have one more show and tell. There, that's not drawing my eye quite so much. But I do need a bit of color variation, because now it's gotten pretty flat. Put some blue in that orange. Make it. Ooh, that's an ugly color. Maybe I won't do that. Do some of this, some of our neutrals. As if this red tree is getting more twigs showing. It's got more neutral colors in it. That's pretty cool. Alrighty, don't hate that. It doesn't take attention from this area. Just need to clean that up a little bit. Yep. Okay. Rinse off that brush. I'm getting a lot of that red coming through, and I'm trying to do blue sky color. So that's not working. Add some more white. Just right in there, I've got a spot that's not consistent with the rest of the sky. I'm going to paint around that. This is a slightly bluer color, so I'll go ahead and add that here or there throughout the sky to make it feel like it belongs. Good enough. All right, I'm going to stop there. Don't see anything that, oh, look what I did though. When I changed this, that relatively changed the shape there. I gotta see if I can't bring something slightly in on that reflection, because now there's no green here, and there is in the reflection. Let me bring some of this dark neutral in here so that it's more like that shape. And it goes back into the shoreline. I can live with that. There, that's just a little more obscured now, so at least we get that shape of this going back in instead of going straight back down. All right, I can live with that. Oh, but you guys will get this picture sent to you too. Okay, well, I think that's it. And be sure to, send me. I love to see when you're completely finished. Please do send me pictures so I can see how it turned out. So especially love to see them signed and hanging on your wall. So, all right. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you soon.